This video is going to review how to make worthwhile annotations on a text that you're reading. Remember that making annotations on a text just means that you're writing down notes in the margins that show whatever it is you're thinking about as you're reading. And it's important to do this kind of active reading because when you are actively thinking about it and taking notes, you remember things a lot better, you have better comprehension. The text itself often becomes more interesting because you're starting to get curious about different things that you see, and curiosity is really closely tied to how interested you are in something. And it also helps you make personal connections to whatever it is that you read, and that also helps you be more engaged in what you're reading. This year, we've looked at these 5 different things that readers of nonfiction do. We've actually looked at them twice. The first time was when we did our research unit, and the second time we came back to them when we started our synthesis essays that we were in the middle of right before this break started. Today for our annotations, we're just going to focus on these last 2 things, developing questions and making connections. So let's talk about levels of questioning first. We have used this 3 levels of questioning, they're called Costa's levels of questioning, as our guide for how to write good questions in your annotations. Sometimes when you are asking questions, you just need to find out the answer to something. That's more of a solving confusion type thing, and that is what this gathering level is all about. These questions, they're easy to write, they're easy to answer. If you were to search the answer on the internet, it would probably pop up right away. And it's totally fine to ask these types of questions, but it's not really what we're going for in this activity. Level 2 questions, this processing level right here in the middle, these questions mean that you're starting to do something with the information. You're thinking about it a little bit more deeply. And these questions are actually, I think, the hardest to write, or at least the hardest to write good questions. And they're pretty hard to answer because when you answer, you usually have to explain yourself a little bit. You have to use a little bit of evidence. Like, for instance, one of these verbs that shows up in here is comparing. And if you are comparing 2 things, you're having to explain each of those things, which means you have to know a little bit about it. And that's a lot trickier than just defining something or listing something like what shows up in the gathering level. The third level is this applying level up here at the top. And these questions are actually the easiest to write, but they're the hardest to answer because there's probably no right or wrong answers to them. One of the verbs that shows up here is evaluate, and that basically means make a judgment about whether or not you agree or disagree. And when you're making a judgment like that, you have to have reasons for it, and that's why these can be so hard to answer. Sometimes the reasons aren't always very clear. So that is a quick review of levels of questioning. Let's talk about making connections. When you make connections in your annotations, there's 3 different types of connections that you could make. The first is text to text, and that means text whatever you're reading to maybe a book that you've read, or an article, or a TV show, or maybe a post you saw on social media, any type of text. The second connection is text to world, and that means connecting whatever you're reading to maybe a historical event, something going on in politics, a social issue, an environmental issue, maybe what you're reading talks about how one country is handling something and you compare it to how a different country is handling the same thing. Those would all be text to world connections. And then finally, the text to self connections. These are any connections that have to do with maybe what you're reading reminds you of a memory you have, or a person you know, or an experience you've had. Anything that has to do with just you personally. So this is the article that you're going to be annotating in OneNote, and it's actually a mix of, part of it's just an article or like a little introduction, and then the rest of it is these pictures of spaces that usually are really, really busy, but because of what's going on right now, they're totally empty. And so when you are looking through these pictures and reading this introduction to the pictures, I want you to be thinking about what questions you might have, levels 2 or 3, and what connections you might have to these. So this example that I'm showing you here, this is in my master notebook, which means that I'm going to put some links in here. Yours might look a little different once you have it in your notebook. If you want to see examples of how to make these annotations, you'll be able to click on a link right here and it will take you to this page. And I put some notes about maybe things I'm wondering, some places where I've seen like really busy spaces, and just different like connections that I have to some of these pictures. So you can use that as an example. And then I also, on the page where this video is going to show up once I have it recorded, I gave you some examples of how you might phrase a level 2 or level 3 question, and also some more specific lists of different types of connections that you could make. All right, and that is it. Go ahead and get started.